To talk more about misinformation in the media, we're joined by journalist and author Max Blumenthal, the founder and editor of The Grey Zone. Max, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
This coronavirus outbreak has spawned a whole new wave of conspiracy theories. It seems almost every day there's a new one. And one can understand this getting onto social media because those are largely unregulated platforms. But now we're seeing it creep into mainstream media, into some big marquee titles. What do you make of that?
Well, I especially want to thank you for having me on because no U.S. network, no independent U.S. network will have me on to debunk this conspiracy theory, which is being rolled out in mainstream media and pushed by the Trump administration, specifically by Mike Pompeo's State Department. It seems that no debate is allowed when the U.S. regime change elite wants to roll out a conspiracy theory. But if a Chinese official, for example, the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, introduces one about the virus escaping from Fort Detrick, all hell breaks loose and U.S. media is filled with condemnations. At the Grey Zone, I, along with my colleague Ajit Singh, really methodically debunked this conspiracy theory. And what we showed was, first of all, that it was first kind of tested through a trial balloon in the right-wing Washington Times, owned by the South Korean Unification Church, and debunked at the time by the Washington Post, along with a scientific consensus. And you have scientists from across the West in Nature magazine declaring absolutely definitively that this could not have escaped from a lab. COVID-19 could have not have escaped from a lab or been the product of lab manufacturing. Lancet magazine, 27 scientists saying the same thing. But then it came roaring back with a vengeance in April as the Trump administration was grappling with 40,000 deaths on its hands in the U.S., seeking to point the finger at China. And it turned to a neoconservative columnist in the Washington Post opinion section, Josh Rogin, at the same newspaper that had originally debunked the theory. The State Department supplied cables, which Rogin proceeded to spin, claiming that there were safety issues at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and suggesting through various sleights of hand that the virus could have escaped from the lab. And then his story was shared by leading lights of the liberal media, of the Democratic establishment. This was on April 14th. And the following day, it comes out on Fox News in coordinated fashion. And then the Trump administration begins to saber rattle at China, blaming it for all 40,000 deaths in the U.S. So that's how this conspiracy theory was revived. And it's still out there. It's still alive in the ether with very little debunking or debate.
Yeah, you mentioned it came out on Fox News, and I'm wondering how much coordination there is between some politicians and news outlets, because there was a Republican politician who blamed China for the outbreak, and on that very same night, Fox was broadcasting this report saying that the virus came from a laboratory.
Yeah, that was Senator Tom Cotton, who is really the kind of pet project of the neoconservative movement. And he was really propped up by the billionaires behind the neoconservative movement, Paul Singer, Sheldon Adelson, to lead Trump's maximum pressure policy on Iran. But now that the new Cold War is turning towards China, Tom Cotton is leading the charge there as well. And so in the morning, Brett Baer, who's a correspondent at Fox News, rolls out a evidence-free story insinuating that COVID-19 escaped from the Wuhan Institutes of Virology. He cites official U.S. sources, doesn't name them, says they have proof, but he has himself not seen it. And that night, Tom Cotton appears on Sean Hannity, the primetime Fox opinion show, and declares that China's responsible for every death. They have blood on their hands, and they have to pay the price. So this is obviously coordinated. And as I mentioned the day before, the Washington Post's columnist, Josh Rogin, a neoconservative who previously worked at the Japanese embassy, who has hung out with, is close friends with Orion Strategies, the lobbying firm which has had the contract for Taiwan. He received the State Department cables from Mike Pompeo's State Department to insinuate that there were safety issues at the Wuhan lab. So this whole thing was coordinated by the Trump administration through the media, and then it comes back to hardliners like Tom Cotton. Then after Tom Cotton's spectacle on Fox News the following day, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, former CIA director, most militaristic member of the Trump administration, demands U.S. access to the Wuhan Institutes of Virology, pushing the conspiracy theory to a new level.
You know, there are so many echoes here, listening to you there, of what happened in the build-up to the Iraq War. In fact, in your piece, you compare this media onslaught with the one that tried to legitimize that Iraq War.
Yeah, Josh Rogan here played the role of Judith Miller. Judith Miller was the New York Times correspondent who basically was the cipher or the sort of human bulletin board for neoconservative propaganda about Iraq possessing weapons of mass destruction, which provided the justification for the invasion of Iraq. They had derived that phony intelligence from a Iraqi defector named Curveball, who turned out to just basically be a paid asset who was lying. And Miller, through the New York Times, provided this neoconservative deception with the veneer of mainstream respectability, and it allowed the Bush administration and specifically the neocon civilians in the Pentagon to sell that story throughout the Beltway, including to Democrats. So you saw Hillary Clinton and Senator Joe Biden advancing the WMD lie on the Senate floor. And that's what's happened here with the Washington Post and Josh Rogan. And again, there's been no...
Right, Brakathia, Howell, Brakathia, Shai, Brakathia, Howell, Brakathia, Shai, Brakathia, Howell, Brakathia, Howell, Bashim, Yahshai, Bashim, Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, which you well. And salutations to the hopeful elect out there, you Akim, Tazadakim, that do this thing in the utmost truth and sincerity. On the pre-Shimon, I'm coming with a quick lesson on the coronavirus, and this one's going to be entitled How the United States Benefit from the coronavirus pandemic. All right, which I believe this is a false narrative. I don't think this virus is as dangerous as they say. I don't believe it's spreading as they say. I believe it's all a hoax. And there's many reasons to believe that. You know, one, this is the same media that told us that we landed on the moon 6 times. This is the same media that told us that 6 million Jews died over there in the Holocaust. So they have the ability to spin certain narratives. And there's benefits to spinning this pandemic virus mass hysteria that they're doing with the coronavirus. One, as Robert F. Kennedy was bringing out, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or John F. Kennedy Jr. rather, on RT was bringing out that they create false pandemics to issue vaccines that are non-tested, right? They don't allow people to test the vaccines. And in the vaccine is where you could put an actual disease. Many people say that, you know, vaccines lead to autism, and you could create situations for people to be fucked up medically, that you could treat them for the rest of their life, give them different diseases that you could treat, and that way you have continuous income, right? Because we know that there's no money in cures. And another reason I'm looking at it, and it makes sense, is this video right here that was on Sky News. What is the economic impact of the coronavirus? And it is to wage economic warfare against China. You know, the United States and China is in a vie for power as the #1 superpower, which China's GDP has surpassed the United States, and the United States has been attacking China. Again, remember, as I mentioned in previous lessons, these wars that are being fought today are not asymmetrical. It's not my troop against your troops. It's covert proxies, economic warfare. And this is a form of economic warfare. When you watch this video on Sky News, it lets you know that the SARS virus, which is another strain of the coronavirus, cost China $40 billion last time in 2003. And you can only imagine how much it's costing them now. Because, you know, if you think about it, how does this shit even make sense? How can you report 45 million, get these 45 billion people have, 45 million people have? How did you get those numbers so fast, so quickly? You know? Why does a virus just spread so fast, so quickly? You know what I'm saying? It's just bullshit, you know? Complete bullshit. Now, the scriptures do speak about plagues and pestilence. But if this was a true natural plague, disaster, and pestilence, how come the elites are moving around so freely? They're not wearing masks over their faces or nothing like that. But this thing has affected China's GDP drastically. You have certain investors that is not invested in China because the majority of investors were fleeing the United States to go to China. And I'm talking about the upper elites. I'm talking about Rothschilds and all that really don't give a fuck who comes out on top. They were fleeing investments in the United States and going to China. Now, thanks to this coronavirus, mass hysteria, when you control the media, you could pretty much control how people think, right? Many nations have fled China, and I work in a warehouse where I deal with Lysol and Clorox products, and since this quote unquote pandemic, mass hysteria has been hitting the media so hard, we have pallets of Lysol going out daily. It didn't used to sell so fast, so you could see why people like Lysol and these different vaccine companies could yield a huge profit, and not only that, you're impacting China's GDP negatively and boosting your own economy. So we can see that's a very smart tactic by Esau. I mean, this is a subtle devil, all right, to get take out two birds with one stone. And if you don't, if you think this is conspiracy, we'll just look at the war in Afghanistan, right? Why was the war in Afghanistan fought? It was to destabilize that region so that China couldn't build pipelines in the Middle East. If you look at a map, you'll see that Afghanistan, you put a war there, a war that's not meant to be ended but to be controlled, and that's what the war in Afghanistan was created for. It wasn't there to be. It wasn't about terror and all that BS that they spin to you. I know it was about controlling pipelines, primarily a pipeline that would connect China directly to the Middle East. Now China has to buy their oil from Africa, and that's really just to